if we go back for a moment to the marvelous clay figurine, the dogu from the mat, another note here on what you can find from good museum sources. This page doesn't just tell you about the figure and give you a descriptive analysis. When you go down, it also links to the Met's timeline of art history to give you a link where you can find out more about the period of time in which that object was produced. So, and there's a wonderful series of images, other images, related images that you can explore. So if you were working on a dogu from the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, you could then look at these images to give you more knowledge and perspective to discuss in your writing. So they also have this great timeline. They're explaining the final phase of Jomon culture dates to 1000 to 300 BCE. And you come down here and they have a little overview of that, where the Jomon culture moves to the Yayoi culture. I think we really need to stop using this tendentious term advanced, more advanced, because it's sort of it's false in many ways to see history as a progression from the inadequate to the advanced. That's not really accurate. It's a developmental process from a simpler relationship to food sources and the natural world to a more complex one that results in more complex social changes. What happens here is that the Yayoi people are primarily farmers, that hunting and gathering is dropping out of as the economic basis of life. And you're starting to get agriculture, in most importantly, wet rice cultivation. And that goes along with living in villages, because when you're cultivating agricultural fields, you tend to stay in one place to tend the field over time. So the textbook elaborates on those changes in that you get more hierarchical social organization. So that's why advanced is a simplistic term, or a term that fails to recognize the complexity. Because with this change to agriculture, there's ownership of fields, ownership of the productive fields, and this can involve social conflict and social hierarchy, dividing society into an overclass and an underclass. So the Yayoi period, one of the important things we're going to see is the architecture, the unpainted wood and thatched roofs. It's do as the textbook says, they show an ongoing Japanese affinity for natural elements and clean lines, and you will see them in the Issei shrine that you're going to study closely. So as the Yayoi period moves into the Kofun period, we see that class structure solidify, where we have a ruling class and then an underclass. The word Kofun means old tomb. Now we have massive tombs to powerful rulers, these incredible earthen mound tombs with this distinctive keyhole shape. And so this is a kind of elaborate tomb culture where art is made for the tomb of the ruler that is somewhat analogous to what we saw in the Shang and Zhou dynasty, including ceremonial bronze objects, because bronze technology has been brought from Korea and China. And my favorites are the clay guardians of the tomb. Those are what are known as haniwa, literally clay circle. So haniwa literally means clay circle, a cylinder, like you see here. And they began, these objects known as haniwa began as simple cylinders that were holding offerings arranged like a picket fence around the tomb, around the ruler's tomb. Okay. So a little bit like the guardian figures, they evolve into figures that depict different kinds of beings, including soldiers like this one, but also a shaman woman, and also all sorts of animals, right? So they begin to become, but there are boat haniwas, there are houses that are haniwa figures, there were living creatures like birds, deer, dogs, monkeys, cows, horses. And so it's by the 6th century that they actually evolve into human forms of different social roles and professions. So these are delightful, and they're a really interesting example of some elements of Japanese aesthetics that will stay alive. So one is that they are unglazed. We so often look at ceramics when we're looking at Chinese and Korean ceramics, their glorious traditions, and they are incredibly elegant with their beautiful celadon glazes. These are deliberately unglazed, which means the clay has been shaped and fired, and it has not been given a glaze to give it a sheen or a polish. So there's a raw power that comes from the living material. Remember, clay is earth and water, and ceramics are earth and water that have fire added to them and air, because you need the air for the fire in the kiln. So they are elemental. And these haniwa are not at all concerned with technical refinement. They are bold, simple, expressive forms. They're never perfectly symmetrical. There's this same love of kind of the delightfully rough-hewn, the irregular. And this gives it a kind of a childlike quality, which we see very much in the warrior, but also in the shaman woman with her funny little short legs, which makes her look very childlike. Oh, she's sort of like a toddler shaman. And that's very different than the terracotta figures that guarded the Qin emperor's tomb. Those figures are life-size, and they're supposed to be lifelike because they're supposed to actually have magical power to protect the emperor through combat. So we're seeing here already in the Kofun period, we're seeing some distinctive features that are going to appear as we look forward in the development of Japanese art. And such as this wonderful example of Japanese ceramics that we'll see in an upcoming module, where it is in no way polished, symmetrical. There's such an appreciation of the poetry of imperfections that there's even a crack. And we'll talk about that there's an appreciation of the expressive power of the materials. So we have Japanese gardens in which the arrangement of the rocks will be expressive, and the rocks themselves have expressive power. And that is something you will see in the next module page when you look at the Ise Shrine.